On this episode of Cultivating Candor, Marv and Drew, in their Ruckus report, will talk about the movie Minecraft, an excellent, hilarious movie that Gen Z and Gen Alpha connected to in a powerful way, making it the most popular video game movie ever created. And then we'll talk about mental health, its effect on Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and ways to help Gen Z and Gen Alpha navigate mental health. And at the end, we will be interviewing Mark Gregory, best-selling author of Religious Refugees, as we talk about deconstruction and reconstruction, what it looks like from his own personal journey, but also what are the stations and avenues of this deconstruction. Thanks for joining us on Cultivating Candor. And here we go. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Cultivating Candor. We are a community of Christians who are seeking to have honest dialogue about the Christian faith, about church, about youth culture, anything and everything we can to inform you, inform ourselves, and to have good dialogue that's vulnerable, honest, and sometimes pretty raw. Today, we're going to start with a Ruckus report about Gen Z, Gen Alpha, with Minecraft. Minecraft. So, Drew, you recently saw Minecraft. I saw it when it first came out. Mm-hmm. I would love your perspective, and then I'll give my perspective on Minecraft and the generational reaction to this film.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, because I kind of came late to the party, I was by myself in the theater. So there's a huge element of seeing the movie that I missed out on.
You were alone?
Yeah, it's Indiana, PA. Like, there's no one in the movie theater.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, maybe on a Saturday, but yeah, not the day I was there, which is like a Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah, nobody was there. But it was kind of nice because it allowed me to just almost focus on the movie and kind of what it had to offer. And it's one of those things you have to go in there understanding this is going to be stupid humor. This is not an Academy Award nominated film.
It's Jack Black.
It's Jack Black. And as long as you go in with that understanding, I think it just makes things a little easier. And it was hilarious. I don't care what anyone says. I found that movie completely and thoroughly entertaining. And I would probably buy it on DVD.
I'm definitely going to buy it on digital because I don't do DVD no more.
Physical media will never die. We won't let it.
I'm in the generational reality. You're still not.
But I'm not. I'm not budging.
So the movie Minecraft, if you don't know, is based off of a video game called Minecraft, which is basically a building world. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's essentially it. Now, there's story mode where you go in and you fight some creepers and all these dark creatures that come out at night that you have to defeat with your sword that you have to make. All kinds of crazy, wild things. But most of it is just building. Mm-hmm. You're building houses. Some people are building things like Hogwarts.
Yeah.
Someone built like Gondor, the whole city, and Helm's Deep, and they're mind-boggling amazing.
It took incredible
thousands of hours. But the movie came out, and every critic was like, "This movie is going to be terrible." They saw all of the trailers, and they're like, "No one's going to watch this movie." Super Mario Brothers had blown out all kinds of different records for video game movies. The critics said this movie's not going to touch that. Mm-hmm. But what we talked about last episode was this idea of the power of social media influence. Mm-hmm. And what they decided to do, the Minecraft producers, they decided that they were going to make memes about their film.
It's fantastic.
And so they took parts of the trailer and built memes off of it. Mm-hmm. There's this one place where a mini creeper rides on a chicken. Okay, it's a wild moment where they're fighting in a WWE style wrestling ring where this dude is riding a chicken. And they put this meme together where someone yells in the background, "Chicken Jackie!" And they made it a meme. Nuts. Now, there's several other things that happen mematically with this movie.
I still have a couple of my favorites.
And there's tons. And then Jack Black writes this ridiculously stupid song about lava chicken. Lava chicken. And it goes wild. So millions and millions of views.
It was like number one on the Billboard charts for like
a
week or a couple of weeks. And it was like the shortest song to last number one on the Billboard charts it blew my mind.
It's like 20 seconds long.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that long.
It's a jingle style length, but he made it work.
He made it work.
Jack Black's got it like that.
Oh, and he did that for Super Mario Brothers too.
True.
With his Bowser song to Princess Peach. But
I love that song.
The reality is that they utilize and leverage TikTok, Snapchat, all these things with these memes. Mm-hmm. So I went to the theater when it first came out, and while I was there, every time one of those memed scenes popped up, all Gen Z and Gen Alpha that were in there shouted the meme title. Mm-hmm. So there's villagers and they apparently like bread in the movie. Mm-hmm. And they would just be like, "We love bread!" Right? You're just like, holy cow, what is happening? I had not seen any of these memes before. My son, who's 16, didn't let me know these memes were coming out. Mm-hmm. And so they were just shouting the whole movie. Just shout, 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 all these different spaces. And then I don't really know where this originated, but there was a popcorn toss.
Yeah, I still don't know where that came from.
Parts of the movie, kids would just throw popcorn at the screen.
There's like strobe light stuff. Kids just going nuts.
Yeah, it was wild. Mm. And our local movie theater, for the first couple showings, they were like, okay, that's cool. Like, you guys do that. But after a while, they're like, please. They had to put up signs, no throwing popcorn at the movie. And so it was kind of a wild thing. But to me, it shows the power, again, of social media taking a film that's ludicrous. Yeah. I mean, it's so silly. Jason Momoa's character, you're like...
He's fantastic. I love Jack Black of the movie. Jason Momoa's character is my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, you're just like... What is this dude? He's like living in the past from the 80s, his success on video games, and he gets trapped into Minecraft. Oh, but it's wild. And I enjoyed it. If you haven't seen the Minecraft film, if it's still in theaters near you, you should go and check it out.
Come with a proper expectation, but it's entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, go in expecting it to be dumb.
Right.
And you'll love it. And it actually, Drew, I think you and I talked about this earlier. Mm-hmm. The Minecraft film blew out all of Mario Brothers records.
Which is insane because the Mario Brothers movie was really good. The Sonic movie, I was surprised, was really good. Minecraft, just like whatever. I guess they have the power of social media. Blew it out of the water.
They were geniuses in how they were dealing with this. Mm-hmm. And there was one story, two teenagers, I know them, but I won't name them, went to the Minecraft film together. Mm-hmm. There were three of them. And they started doing this, all the meme yelling, they're shouting and they're doing this thing. And they're like, "Chicken Jackie!" And they're yelling. This 30-year-old man who brought his 5 or 6-year-old kid comes out into the lobby and he steps up to these teenagers and like, "Y'all need to stop. Like, what are you doing? You guys are blah, blah, blah." He steps up too. He steps up to these teenagers. And oh my gosh, they were like, they said all kinds of things back, like, "What is going on? Why are you stepping to teenagers?" And the guy finally backed down. But I mean, it's just a wild and crazy ride. So if you watch it with your kids, if you have Gen Z or Gen Alpha kids, they'll 90% know some of these memes. Watch it with them at home. Have popcorn. Mm-hmm. Be willing to clean it up after. Mm-hmm. Have fun with your kids.
So I actually read an article from Forbes that was talking about all the memes and stuff like that. And they presented a good question because if you think about kind of this generation and kind of meme culture in general, a lot of it comes from, I would say, like agreed upon irony, if that makes sense. It's like something that, this is stupid, but we're all going to collectively make fun of it just because it's fun. And so when the memes were starting up and all this, like Forbes is actually like, we're not sure if it's that kind of irony or if it's genuine enthusiasm. And I feel like it's a mix of both.
It was a mix of both.
Because I'm definitely, when it first came out, I was one of those members like, this is dumb. Like, how are you going to make an actual movie out of Minecraft? And I'd never played Minecraft, but I knew enough about it to realize there's no real, story to this. Like, Claire Obscure 33, which is a fantastic game, has an actual story. So they make a movie out of that. Sure, that makes sense. Minecraft, I don't know. But, with this collective memery, I guess, it probably started off ironic. And then you get into and realize, wait, this actually isn't bad. And then you genuinely start to enjoy it. So there's that weird kind of mixture, but it somehow worked out and made them billions of dollars. So I don't know if billions is accurate, but close enough.
Yeah. Who knows? We can look it up later.
Yeah.
You can look it up online too. Google
Do
how
your
much
own ruckus
money
report at home.
did Minecraft. Yeah, and ruckus reports are fun. There's lots of ruckus in the world. Minecraft clearly caused a lot of ruckus with Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
Big time.
So let's transition a little bit.
Yeah.
The ruckus report's fun, but then we want to move into something that's a little bit more serious. And speaking of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, one of the things that the statistics are really showing is that the mental health of these generations is worse than millennials or boomers or Xers. And some of the sociologists are wondering and psychologists are wondering, is that because this generation is a lot more willing to admit that they have a problem than other generations?
That's a good question.
Or is it actual statistics that are proving to be true?
Yeah.
I think that there's a little bit of a mix of both. I think with millennials, they began to be a lot more honest about mental health. They had discussions about it. They were sometimes proud that they went to therapy because they were taking care of themselves. Self-care was a huge piece of that generation. So I think millennials now having kids, creating that environment, it could definitely be a part of it. But there is definitely a sense that they are lonelier, they are more depressed, and statistically, they are more suicidal with suicidal ideation and suicidal practicing it, putting it out, and doing it or attempting it. And so I have my own thoughts, Drew, on why this is based off of my own research. But what do you think is bringing this about in these generations, Gen Z and Gen Alpha?
Yeah, so this is almost going to be an obvious kind of observation, but with our generation, the generation before us, there was obviously no social media. We kind of came up when it was starting up, but there was a requirement where you had to have that face-to-face interaction. You had to have one-on-one conversations to somebody, learn how to have those conversations. Whereas when, the internet came out, while we had the skill to have those one-on-one conversations, it almost became unnecessary. Not totally unnecessary, but not as necessary, because you could just send a text and people could understand what you're talking about. And it was just real quick and real easy. But as generations progressed, they had the convenience of the new technology and that quick access, but didn't really have that necessity to have face-to-face interaction. So it was just part of that being lost made it hard to make genuine person-to-person connection. And, just the way God made us, that's so important to have that kind of community, to have fellowship with one another. That's how we're wired, as human beings. So to lose that, or to at least have that be harder to obtain or harder to engage with, there's that element of community that you lose. There's that element of that person-to-person interaction, someone to talk to, someone to work through stuff with, that you lose. And I think that contributes a lot to the loneliness that people feel and the depression that people can come across, because, I have no one to offload this stuff with, and I'm just dealing with it with myself. And we all know how things go when you're just by yourself trying to deal with hard things. It doesn't always go well. So that's my thought. And again, I'm no expert. That's just based off my observations and just my own experience as well. So
no, I agree with that. I mean, I've done a lot more extensive research on it because I had to for a dissertation I was writing about empowering the next generation for leadership. And it was a surprising find for me because I didn't know just how bad statistically it was for this generation, both of these Gen Z and Gen Alpha. With Gen Z in particular, it's worse. Gen Alpha is younger. They're 13, 14 right now is the beginning of Gen Alpha. And they seem to have a little bit more healthy outlook, but they're still really young. But in the Generation Z category, 34% of kids say that they are not flourishing. Not flourishing. I'm not doing well. 34%. And, the statistics are showing that suicidal ideation and attempts and actually success at it are in similar statistical ranges. the one thing that was noticed by all researchers, sociologists and psychologists, is that the highest rating of poor mental health comes from those in the LGBTQ community. This podcast is not going to go after the why,
right.
but we just want to share some of those pieces of information. If you have kids in your life that you know are a part of that community, they're going to need you more as a part of community.
Check in.
To be with them and to check in on them for sure. But there's ranges of where they feel flourishing and not flourishing. School, a lot of kids say that they are flourishing more than they are at home. But what's interesting about this idea of flourishing is it's attached to two things: belonging and being known. So if they don't feel they belong, then they don't feel known. And if they have those two pieces of I don't feel like I belong anywhere and I don't feel like anyone really knows me, then they're really low on their mental health and they're willing to admit it. And part of that is asking good questions, teachers asking good questions, pastors asking good questions, parents asking good questions. And one of the statistics said, why aren't you getting therapy? As someone who has a mental health, obviously you know you have mental health problems. And the highest rating, I think it was like 43% of people who are not getting therapy said it's because my parents are not taking my mental health seriously. And to me, that's like, okay, we need to wake up as parents, as pastors, as youth ministers, as people who work with kids, as teachers, or just interact with kids at all, that there has to be a serious listening to say, okay, you say you're not healthy. Let's get you into therapy. There's nothing wrong with therapy. It doesn't mean that you're a bad parent.
Right.
It doesn't mean that your child is broken. It's not an admittance of fault or whatever it is. It is something that I think is important for us to hear our kids and say, let's get you into therapy. And the therapist might say, hey, I think they're going to be okay. They just needed to get a check-in. And so I think that's a vital piece for us as pastors, youth workers, teachers, parents, wherever you find yourself working with teens. But one interesting statistic that I had, and I'd love for you to interact with these stats I've been saying. One statistic that I read in Springtide Research is, we're not sponsored by Springtide Research, but I do love their research. You can look them up. Springtide Research has done phenomenal studies on Generation Z and Generation Alpha. And they look at it from religion, education, home life, friend life. And one of the things they said is that kids who have poor mental health, but who get involved into a spiritual community, church, youth group, are 25% less likely to have poor mental health going on. So, I mean, it grows and it expands their ability to see themselves better, because belonging and being known are integrated into that type of community, or it should be. And I'll just say one final thing. Part of the reason why kids don't feel belonging or known is because of social media. You're dead on with that, because you can put yourself out there online and people can know what you put out, but you can put out false stuff. You know, you do your makeup real nice and you take a picture, or you can use a filter. You might not have freckles, but everyone might think you have freckles because you have a freckle filter. And so you don't really feel known and you don't feel like you belong. And those are things that are affecting our kids' mental health.
Big time, big time.
So what are your thoughts?
I mean, I was actually reading something today. I think it was from that book you gave me, where it was about 75% of kids who were involved in some type of religious organization. Obviously, we believe in Christian, religious affinity, but the statistics just objectively, like any type of religious organization or involvement, 70 to like 75% of them felt like they were flourishing. They're like, yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm physically doing well as well. So it's like there's a lot of truth to having some semblance of community around you. And it's something that, when I read it, I hadn't really thought of it before, but like, looking at my own upbringing and, I was a church kid. A lot of my friends who I went to school with also went to Allegheny Center Alliance Church. And it was just nice to have that semblance of community. And then whenever we moved to New York, there's a huge part of that was lost. And obviously being a new kid in the school, that's going to be hard to feel known or feel seen. But there was a while there, probably that first year, where I wasn't doing well. As much as I tried to be open, like, okay, obviously God has something planned. That's why we're here. It was tough. It wasn't until about a year in when I started to make friends, started to get involved in stuff where I felt, comfortable, felt like, there were people I could actually talk to, people who knew me well enough where we could, have legit conversations and stuff. Yeah. But it just made a lot of sense. And it's really was eye-opening to me. I have 2 little girls who are starting to come up, things that I think I should be conscious of and try to be intentional about as they grow. Like, okay, what kind of things can I get them involved in? So if nothing else, they have a sense of community, let alone some of the other skills that they can learn from that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's excellent. And, the question then comes, if this is an epidemic happening in Generation Z and potentially with Generation Alpha as they get older, what can we do? And the statistics, I think, show several things. The first thing is listen to your children. Listen to the teens that you work with, that you spend time with. Listen more than you talk. Now, for me, as a pastor, preacher, author, writer, listening's hard because I like to talk. But it's important that I sit down with my teenagers and really allow them to talk to me, and I hear them, and I do active listening. Yeah. And then, with that listening, you still love them and you still care for them and you still interact with them, and you have this back and forth conversation. The next thing that is important is if your kid is sharing that they have difficulty with mental health, help them. Get them into therapy or have conversations between you and each other about it. Another thing that I think is important is that parents monitor their children's social media. How much are they consuming? How much time are they spending there? Today, let's be honest, you're a parent with little kids. I'm a parent with sort of young and sort of old kids. It's a lot easier when you're tired, you come home from work, to say, here's your tablet, go watch a show, go downstairs.
Oh, it's so easy.
It's easy. But when we create that atmosphere, it tells them, I don't care to be with you. And they might not think that, but if that's all you ever do, that's kind of what you're communicating. Yeah. And then the other thing is get your kids in youth group, get your kids in church. Now, I know that sounds self-serving as a pastor, but the statistics are clear that getting into a Christian community, a religious community, is supremely helpful for their mental health.
Big difference.
Yeah, and if it's a safe place for them to share with their youth pastor, with their youth leaders, with other teens, what's going on in their lives, it creates a space that they feel belonging, they feel known. And even if your kid is wrestling with things that, like they might cuss, right? So what? In youth ministry, allow them to be there. Don't always try and control them. Clearly you don't want all that foul language there.
There's got to be some semblance of discipline, but there's a weird balance between you're welcome here. This is, your space to be yourself. However, we're still teaching Christian values. We're still teaching what to follow the way,
And they might be wrestling with other things that, Christians will be like, oh my gosh, why are you wrestling with that? Right. But creating a space where they can talk about it, they know where you stand on it. That's okay to share how you feel about certain things that kids are doing, but you don't shun them, push them out. I think that's where, especially in the LGBTQ community, that's where it's getting really bad for the mental health because they're being rejected in every environment. And when you accept them as a person, you're not accepting their actions. And that's where we get confused. Yeah. Where we're like, oh, well, when I say, hey, let's spend time together, I'm saying everything you do is okay. That's not true. No. But you're saying, I want to be with you. I want to know you. I want to hear what you're wrestling with. And parents need to be a safe place for kids to have honest conversation because as they're wrestling, they're trying to shape and mold their identity. And it's not acceptance. I'm not saying that because I do believe in the conservative view of marriage and sexuality. But I think it is important to have a listening posture and spend time listening to them in that process. So I think those are some helpful ways that parents can and youth leaders can really help the mental health issues going on with Generation Z. What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of just wanted to tie back to the interview that you had with our last episode.
Yeah.
Just creating that safe space. Yes, you may not have all the answers. You may not know specifically what directly can I do to directly impact and help your direct situation, but at least the willingness to be like, hey, let's step into this. I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to walk with you as we figure this out. That makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the question? I was thinking of that.
No, that's right. Ways that parents and other adults can help Generation Z in their mental health.
Yeah. Honestly, it sounds basic, but spending time with them where they are. Like if your kid likes to play video games, okay, let's either learn about it and talk about it, figure it out. You may learn to play it depending on your time availability. If they like to play baseball, all right, let's go outside, play baseball, get the color, draw, whatever the case is. Spend time with them where they are. Mm-hmm. With my daughter, she's only 3, but like she loves to color and she likes to play this game called Bad Guys, where it's basically just run around the living room. I pick her up and put her in a chair. But it's incredible to me just how much we connect over stuff like that. And like, she'll share just her basic struggles. I want to be at the new daycare with my sister, but it's just like, she knows that I care about her. Yes, there's obviously times where I have to be the disciplinarian, but she knows that love is paramount to everything. And she runs up to me. I know it's not going to last forever, but she'll run up to me after, a day of work, big old hug, Dad, I love you, I want to hold my hand and stuff. And it's just, I know it's not going to last forever, but it's great. But it's
live in the moment, bro.
Just the moments that we do get to share. I know that have come through those intentional moments of trying to interact, trying to build that community with her, trying to build that relationship with her. And obviously as kids get older, they got a whole bunch of other stuff that they're involved in. I understand that, but just try to meet your kids where they are, whether, a youth group sense or a parenting sense, just try to be there for them in a place maybe they feel comfortable, and you never know, they might be able to they might feel comfortable enough to open up. One
of the funny ways that I connect with my teenager is that him and his friends are doing this thing called Kunkler food reviews, where there's one of their friends who just tries any and all drinks and food, and they're filming it, putting it on TikTok, and they actually use our podcast room to do the filming. And then I go on my TikTok, I share it, I repost it, I favorite it, I like it. It is wild. In the show notes, we're going to put some links for Springtide Research. I'll put a link for the Kunkler food review so you can just see how weird it is. But supporting it is something that he feels loved in.
Right.
He's like, wow, you actually like what I'm doing?
Right.
Do I like it?
Is it my favorite form of entertainment?
Would I watch it on my own? Probably not. But
I love you, kids.
I love you, so I'm going to let you use the room. I'll help you however I can with your crazy, wild TikTok journey.
Just clean up after yourselves.
Yeah, they don't always do that. But anyways, it's fun to support them in any ways that we can in that process. But I really appreciate your input on that and meeting them where they're at. My son tried to get me to play Fortnite. It was not my jam, you know what I mean? But I heard all about it.
Right.
I learned I didn't learn how to do them, but I learned all the Fortnite dances, and then Justin Jefferson makes the gritty up, and then all of a sudden it's a Fortnite dance. I mean, these are ways you can connect with them. But the important thing is really, truly find ways to connect with your kids.
Yeah.
Have those conversations. Be willing to listen to them where they're at, connect with them, give them that sense of belonging and the sense of being known, where they can reveal in vulnerable spaces, in vulnerable times, what's really going on. And Ellie last episode talked about vulnerability and the difference between honesty and vulnerability, and really allowing your kids to be vulnerable. And I have found that it's important for parents to be vulnerable with their kids as well. Final thing I'll say is you might have noticed my shirt says Man Up on it. It is a men's conference in Pittsburgh. If you're from the Pittsburgh area, I encourage you to look it up. Man Up Conference, Pittsburgh. Some Steelers are going to be there June 7th. Yeah. It's a phenomenal Christian environment for men to grow as men, as fathers, and as husbands. And Mason Rudolph will be there. They are not sponsoring this episode either, but we will have in the show notes the link to it because we believe in it, and we'd love for you, if you're in the Pittsburgh area, to join in and be a part of it.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we had for today, our Ruckus Report and our serious report on mental health. On this episode, after this, we are going to be interviewing Mark Karris, my old RA from college, but he's also a best-selling author, and he has some really good things to say about deconstruction. And he's also a trauma therapist, so there's some of that's thrown in there as well. So we invite you to stick around and watch our interview. This has been episode 2 of Cultivating Candor. Thanks for being with us.
All right, catch you later.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 2 of Cultivating Candor. We are a community for honest Christian discussion, content, and commentary. And today I have with me a friend and former RA, Mark Karris. Dr. Mark Gregory Karris is an ordained pastor and licensed marriage and family therapist with a full-time practice in San Diego, California, a lot warmer than Pennsylvania. He specializes in religious trauma and couples therapy and is the author of best-selling books, Divine Echoes, Reconciling Prayer with the Uncontrolling Love of God, and Religious Refugees, Deconstructing Towards Spiritual and Emotional Healing, the book that we'll highlight today. To learn more about Mark and his work, you can go to markgregorykarris.com. And Mark, we just want to say welcome and thank you so much for joining this podcast, taking time out of your busy day.
Marvin, it's really, truly a pleasure to be here with you. I appreciate your mind and your heart and your passion for God, and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. I appreciate the fact that we go back a long way. Nyack College for both of us was pretty back there now. We're old. But I'm just going to jump in and ask you a couple questions.
Yeah.
About the book. We're in the podcast last episode and this episode, we're trying to wrestle with the idea of deconstruction. And I want to give our audience, which is probably a more conservative, theological, conservative church type of community, a view into deconstruction. And I really appreciated your book and how you went after it and talked about it as religious refugees. And so the first question I have for you is that in the book, Religious Refugees, you talk about the stations of the D/R journey, deconstruction, reconstruction. Could you walk us through those really quickly? I know there's many chapters on the stations, but yeah.
I'll try to unpack that a little bit. In Religious Refugees, which is about 3 books ago, I think I considered a religious refugee a person who has chosen to flee their homeland of institutional religion to find a space where they feel safe and congruent. Some sociologists call them the de-churched, but really try to unpack their experiences. And so in the stations, I refer to, first of all, just a slight thought on deconstruction. Little pushback in the term because you get to Derrida and Foucault and some philosophy, and some people are like, I'm not sure it's the true nature of deconstruction. I do prefer spiritual metamorphosis at this point, but the DR journey, or the deconstruction, reconstruction journey, is something I really unpack in that book. But instead of stages of faith, and you can think of Fowler's stages of faith and other people who have some models, I just was like, I just preferred the word station. There was just something about these places that we visit, and sometimes it's not linear, and so we can go back to some of the stations. It's just, I thought of literally like sort of railroad stations. I had that in mind, but just these stations where you hang out. And so one was sort of feeling at home. I think that's how I categorize this comfort of belonging. If you took the analogy of a home, the dusty family photos, the familiar rituals, the ease of being your imperfect, messy self in the church. And it's a spiritual home filled with love and predictability. You know, sister so-and-so and brother so-and-so, and you've been them for years, and it feels like home. And so that's what I considered like station 1. Station 2, I thought of as splinterhood. the station where these tiny contradictions begin to surface, these splinters in the mind and the heart, this cognitive dissonance that sometimes we try to push down, but they sort of come back up, and maybe we try to push it down again. So a belief um, like God loves everybody may clash with somebody like, gosh, but then you say gay people are automatically going to hell. No, 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 but God loves them, and but sort of pushing it down. But at some point, it's just like, oh, this nagging, something doesn't sit right with me, or the nature of divine violence. Like God can't be a composite of Stalin and Mao Zedong and the worst, uh, like human being who would want to torment and torture human beings to teach them a lesson. But no, 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 that's the Bible. The Bible said it. I must believe it. And so this pushing down of these splinters, and so that's sort of splinterhood.
Hmm.
Station three is like to be or not to be. The splinters deepen. You're caught between staying in the familiar or risking the unknown. So some double down, searching for answers to make the discomfort go away, deeper Bible studies, apologetics, and others dare to step off the front porch and begin wandering into maybe unfamiliar terrain. So
Hmm.
that's what to be or not to be. Like, what should I do with this?
Yeah.
And then some return in station four, return home differently. Here, the traveler turns back. The journey was too much too soon, or maybe just not for them. And they got a little taste of Brian McLaren or Peter Enns or um, some of these other sort of progressive authors, and like, no, 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 I'm sticking with my maybe conservative, evangelical, or reformed tradition. And so they come home changed, learning a little bit, but really wanting to stay tethered to what has been familiar.
Hmm.
Disorientation, for some, now the splinters explode. You can't unsee or unknow. It's almost like that image of there's those images of sort of a beautiful woman and a witch, and like depending on how you see it, but once you see that they both exist, you can't unsee it. So this is where some theological frameworks crumble, life events sort of shatter old certainties, and the internal chaos can feel like drowning. I mean, some people in this disorientation phase of the station panic and sleeplessness and shame and fear of rejection, despair, almost spiritual vertigo. The next station is once they're feeling this disorientation, for some, they go to Angstville. And here anger becomes the dominant lens. I admittedly, I was there. Cynicism and judgment and grief sort of saturate every thought about the church. And then rage at the harm caused by toxic theology, and it becomes all consuming. And so trapped in this painful loop. And some leave the faith, some stay embittered, but many feel stuck in this. But again, that puts us to station seven, where some say farewell and goodbye. Some lovingly part ways with Christianity. I know some people, it's just been there, done that, got the t shirt.
Hmm.
Not for me, not with a scream, but a soft goodbye. And they can find healing and freedom outside the church, no longer clinging to bitterness. But again, some people stay in Angstville, but some go to station seven, farewell and goodbye. And the last station is an extreme makeover, home edition, and others reimagined faith entirely. Sort of Christianity 2.0 emerges, not as a return to sort of old doctrines, but as a reconstruction, if you will, from the rubble. And spirituality becomes expansive, inclusive, rooted in love. Still appreciate reading the biblical text, but not with sort of this maybe reductionistic or narrow lens, as if like every word just came right out of the mouth of God and have no human elements. And so they kind of reclaim what's life giving, discard what's not, and build something new. So those are sort of stations, sort of one through eight in a real snapshot.
Oh, man, I really appreciate that. And one of the things really quickly that I really appreciate is the orientation, disorientation, reorientation. If you look at
Uh huh.
those are essentially
Right.
the three ideals between all the psalms. Some are oriented, some are disoriented, and then some are reorienting. I think it's Walter
Yeah.
Kaufman that kind of put
Yes.
that together. And so the journey you're talking about itself is a biblical journey. In
Yeah.
that sense of we should get disoriented so that we can get reoriented. So I really appreciate that. And you talk
Yeah.
about, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know, just one point. I mean, there's 8 stations. Some can fit that model, and
Yeah.
I know Walter Brueggemann's work. But again, for some, maybe don't fit the model because they reorientate outside of the Christian faith, and so just acknowledging some people can and take that journey as well. Yeah,
Yeah. No, no, no. And that wasn't to diminish that because
sure.
they are reoriented to something.
Yeah,
But,
true, true.
yeah.
Mhm.
So, I really appreciated the framework of splinterhood. You had the stage of that, and then you took a whole chapter to
Mhm.
describe splinterhood. There's doubt, frustration, the looming questions, all seem to lead to this place, which leads to one of those stations. But in one of your final stations, farewell and goodbye. My
Mhm.
question, what are the biggest reasons why someone gets there? Is it just
Mhm. Mhm.
logical? Is there other reasons for getting to the farewell and
Yeah, a great question. This is my appeal to sociologists who don't have no judgment in this, and they're just looking at these folks and seeing what themes emerge. And so, in that book, I do remember appealing to Josh Packard's work and Kinnaman's work and Kathy Escobar's work. So these people who are looking at some of these dynamics, and some themes that evolve or really emerge here. So one is politics and bureaucracy.
Mhm.
So again, this is the research. Like, you can literally look this up in the qualitative research. Why have folks left the church
Yeah.
or reoriented in a different direction, the de-churched? So politics and bureaucracy, many left when church politics or red tape blocked them from contributing, whether it's due to their gender or age or race or education or disability or life experience. They felt sidelined, like there is always sort of this in crowd and they're not in it. And so, despite effort, they felt disillusioned and unwelcomed. And I even remember at Nyack College, some people feeling that way and saying, "Well, Mark, we always thought you were in the in crowd." And I was like, I actually never felt like I was in the in crowd, but I can see your point. Some people were elevated and were more visible than others. And I do remember, I'll never forget it. One guy in Nyack, I always thought he's never up at front talking, but he was so smart and he had like such a passion for Jesus and such a mission centered heart,
Mhm.
but he was not aesthetically what was, I don't know, like, he didn't have the charisma as some other people, and he did have profound acne. And I don't know, I just even then I was like, why isn't this guy up there?
Mhm.
But I thought of him when I wrote about that. One other thing is clone war syndrome. What I put that term, some churches fear difference and suppress diversity, producing cookie cutter Christians. There's no space for messy conversations or theological variation, just conformity. So those seeking honest dialogue and freedom of thought often felt they had no place and quietly slipped away. This was my experience in the Pentecostal church, for sure. There was a clear us and them, in and out,
Mhm.
really, and you should look a certain way. You should listen to a certain kind of music, not listen to a certain kind of music. I was not allowed to hang out with people who believed in the Trinity. It was a pretty wild, but I would definitely, they definitely had Clone War syndrome going on there. The next in the literature is moral prescriptions. Instead of empowering people to serve their communities, some churches focus narrowly on sort of sin avoidance and sometimes end times doom. So,
Mhm.
for those eager to sort of live out justice and compassion and love, sermons were more about personal holiness and hellfire, which kind of felt a little tone deaf, leaving them hungry for something deeper. That may be related to the next point, which is shallowitis. In some churches, authenticity is replaced with performance. Pain and doubt are ignored, replaced with catchy choruses, surface level sermons, and forced positivity. And for those craving depth and honesty, space to lament, the shallow waters just, in a sense, became unlivable for them. And
Yeah.
then the last one, which is huge, falls under the category of rejection and ridicule. And many have felt judged rather than embraced. And like society's constant messages that we're not enough, churches sort of can echo that rejection. And instead of healing shame, they can deepen it and leaving people to walk away for the sake of their mental and spiritual well being. So
Yeah.
those are some of the reasons. Oh, let me put one more in there, which at the time was not a reason, although it was sort of emerging, is white nationalism in
Mm.
politics in that broader sense, where people can't stomach some people in leadership, where churches are saying, hey, let's love Christ and let's model our lives after Christ, and seeing some people in leadership in government, without naming names, that looked like, feel like, taste like the opposite of anything Christ-like. And for them, that would clearly be another reason um, why people are left the church. And that includes sort of racist experiences that they've had as well.
Yeah. I mean, and using the Lord's name in the feeling of justice for violence that has been seen in that nationalistic um that platform has been difficult for a lot of people, saying that this is God's will that we do this type of thing,
Hmm.
which is antithetical to who God really is. In my opinion, looking at Scripture, that's taking the Lord's name in vain, and we've always in the church said, "Don't take the Lord's name in vain," but we're
Hmm.
vain saying this is God when it's anti-biblical. So,
Okay,
yeah.
so Marvin, is it possible for people who love God to perceive that their God is a God who condones violence,
uh,
yet
yeah,
miss the mark when
yeah.
it comes to being Christ-like? Is that
Yeah,
possible?
uh, it's difficult because
Ah,
for me,
yeah, yeah.
if they're being led by the Holy Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit will be the remarkable aspect of their life, where peace,
Hmm.
patience, kindness, love, gentleness are
Wow.
are a part of who they are. Self control. When you're angry, do you lash out? I know you and I could go back to the Old Testament and have
Yeah.
conversations about that. But when it comes to the idea of modeling after Jesus, what
Hmm.
he said, "Follow me, do as I did." God is
Yes.
love. Um, I do not see how you can justify those, especially when what you're railing against is not a biblical, anti-biblical, and many times type of ideal, but you're
Hmm.
railing against certain things that can be considered conspiratorial rather than actually
Yeah.
real. And so that's where I would wrestle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people who I thought had the Holy Spirit and they're acting like that, it's like I do step back and say, do you really know Jesus? Um,
Wow.
so
Marvin, you are being you're very bold in your statement. And can I just point out, in a rather, where I'm going with this, in a
yeah.
rather feisty way. But this is really important. And one of the reasons that I list in religious refugees as one of the reasons some people do move away from the faith, or at least the biblical text as the absolute word of God without human elements in there, is you're giving precisely the rationale why someone, particularly like myself, would then look at the portrayal of God in the Hebrew Bible, mostly, some in the New Testament, but where we would say, gosh, that didn't look like Jesus. And that doesn't look like peace, patience, kindness, self-control. That doesn't look like someone who's, well, I mean, it looks like someone who's lashing out, in your words, who's someone violent. So we would say, maybe those portrayals of God in the Hebrew Bible that portrayed God as maiming, burning alive, drowning, perhaps millions of grandmothers and children in waters where alligators and sharks can eat them, and knowing that that would happen. Maybe that is not an objectively 100% accurate portrayal of what happened and who God really is, because that really doesn't seem like the flavor of Christ. No need to argue the point, but just sharing that that's one thread where the
Right.
cognitive dissonance came up, and saying, gosh, that doesn't look Christ-like. But then having people saying, no, that's the biblical death. Yes, God did maim, kill, burn people alive, command people to be stoned, command kids who were disobedient to parents. Yes, they should be stoned to death.
Mhm.
And someone who committed adultery, they should be stoned. Really? That was like God's heart for those people? That doesn't make any sense. That is the cognitive dissonance I'm talking about, the
Right.
splinter that I could no longer ignore.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, I see the historicity and the words of the scripture is accurate and fully from
Yep, totally. I
you know when
respect your opinion on that.
yeah, and when I look at those, you know, I've already talked just briefly looking
Yeah,
through the process. God had sovereignty and knows what the path was that was in that, knowing that this is my perspective, and you and I've
totally.
shared it
Yep.
before that God knew that those specific people would kind of annihilate the Israelites and take them out. Now, the problem that we have is that American Zionism has I think hindered this ideal where we call ourselves the new Israel, and so we justify as Americans what we do as the new Israel. But the problem is that if you're going to look at it properly, it's the entirety of the church, not just one new nation. And I think that's where we're trying to justify our
Yeah.
violence, saying we are the chosen nation, when I think many people would agree America is more Babylonian than it is Israelite. And
Yeah. Yeah.
we could totally have a totally different discussion about
Yeah. Ooh,
that.
can I make one point on that?
But yeah.
We're wrestling here, brother.
Oh, why did I
Uh,
toss this up?
one point though is even if you point to the American church, if you're suggesting that that's why God did what He did in the Hebrew Bible, then those who are Jews could easily say, well, Marvin, thank you so much. God does use violence and torture and torment and genocide to bring about his will. And if God did that in the Hebrew Bible, what would stop God, if that's God's heart? And if you say that Jesus is God and that was Jesus's heart as well, what keeps us from saying, yeah, we should annihilate Iran and the Houthis and everybody else and in Gaza, and so it would certainly reinforce that framework,
Right.
which I would feel a little caution about.
Well,
But
right.
why? So much to talk about, though.
Right. I'll go back to just one more point about this because this
I
is
love
real.
it. Okay,
That
okay.
the violence ended with Christ's death. You know, that was the
Uh,
full wrath of God.
yeah,
And so you can't use that any longer
yeah.
as that perspective. But we could digress into that,
Got
and
it. Got it.
clearly a reason why there's dissonance. So those of you who are listening, questions like
Yeah,
this are things that we have to cognitively think through to have an
yeah.
educated discussion, not just a, oh my gosh, how could you question? Um,
Sure, sure.
I think that's the response. So um,
Wonderful.
in your book, you talk about shock absorbers in chapter 6 as it comes to religion and a whole deconstruction specifically.
Uh huh.
How do these shock absorbers, and maybe you can label them just some of them really quickly, how do they both
Yeah.
help and hurt a spiritual journey?
Right. So shock absorbers, gosh, I'm going back a bit. I think they described our psychological defense mechanisms.
Yeah.
So just like a car needs shock absorbers to handle the bumps in the road, we've got internal ones, these automatic unconscious strategies that help us blunt the force of emotional and spiritual blows. So they're not flaws in a sense, they're actually gifts, especially when it comes to trauma. And so they can help us function, especially when painful or uncomfortable experiences feels too overwhelming for us to take in. But so I don't know, I forget how I talked about it, but these defense mechanisms, which in that context, out of that context, affect us all, whether it's splitting, which is a common defense mechanism. I see this with people who are um, working through the deconstruction reconstruction process. I mean, and even outside of that, of course, it's a well-known defense mechanism. But splitting all good, all bad, right?
Mhm.
There's something about, it's easier to think that way. Also, I wrote a book on healing heartbreak and romantic relationships. The research shows that it's actually helpful if we break up or divorce to have this sense like, yeah, they were horrible human beings, and there's a good reason why I should have left them because they weren't good for me, and I'm better than them and healthier. And so splitting is very common instead of maybe the church had some positive elements to it, which I can appreciate and take in, um, as opposed to no, the church as a whole is just this demonic
Mm.
force that has no value to it, and I'm glad I left it. That I mean that would be a little bit of the flavor of probably splitting a little bit. But whether it's intellectualism or denial, or these different sublimation, these different defenses that keep us from being with reality in order to blunt it or distort it in a way for us to survive. Anger, sometimes that could be a defense against vulnerability and the sadness and the hurt and the loneliness and the aloneness that we can feel on the journey. But it comes out just as anger and angst instead of, hey, can you slow down? And I just feel like you're really hurting. And I want to know why. I
Yeah.
mean, I see your anger, but tell me what's underneath that. So some of these things can be in this process, and of course, in our own relationships as well.
Yeah. No, that's good. I really appreciate that. And putting in the context of faith, I think is helpful in that framework, where we can do all or nothing thinking or catastrophizing everything rather than slowing down and thinking through what are the goods and the bads. Yeah, I especially
Yeah,
that I appreciated.
yeah.
Earlier in this show,
Mhm,
my co-host and we talked about mental health, especially for the younger generations,
mhm,
and
mhm.
statistics are showing that it's getting progressively worse within Generation Z and Generation Alpha, at least in their vulnerability in naming it. But the suicidal ideology has increased over years.
Mhm.
So you do in other books talk about trauma. You're a therapist. So getting your perspective on this as we tie it into the beginning of the show, what could religious institutions, specifically churches, do to
Yeah.
help those with mental health problems? And how do we avoid religious trauma for them? Because you mentioned religious trauma is one of
Mhm,
the
mhm, mhm.
reasons why people splinter because they were wounded or
Uh-huh.
so.
Yes, yes.
What
Mhm.
could we do to help
Yeah.
them and avoid religious trauma?
Yeah. Ooh, that's huge. I will also say that, gosh, when you talk about the younger generations, it's so complex.
Mm,
There's a lot of sociologists that talk about, and I still believe there's a sickness in our culture. I'm still able to use a word like sin and sinful attitudes, and really use the word demonic in the sense of these systems and structures that are adversarial to love and goodness and beauty and truth and Christ likeness. And I could see that in our culture. And I'm just reminded that it's not just the church that can affect people, but our society. And there's a lot of sociologists that talk about the rise in mental health concerns among young people. And well, would you look at it? Interesting, the rise in social media. There seems to be some kind of correlation, and there's something to be said there with the comparison and the peer pressure and the normalizing of these attitudes and behaviors, and got to look a certain way and feel a certain way and just have these perspectives that are just not really healthy. And I mean, the things that younger generations are facing just on a societal level, and the lack of belief in authority figures and pandemics and wars and who can you trust and what can you trust and how can we trust the future when we don't even know if we can survive in the next 10 years. Between the fear and the comparison and the peer pressure and the social media influences in that way, a lot of, in my mind, very unhealthy damage to these young people.
yeah.
But I do think some churches are genuinely trying and doing some beautiful work. And I know you and your heart and your church, and you are engaging in healthy ways of trying to be with young people in this way. And so many need to be more intentional about stepping into the messy, complex terrain of mental health with humility and certainly a trauma-informed lens. There's books being written on, trauma-informed theology, trauma-informed churches.
Yeah.
Um, uh, um, what's her name? Oh, she's going to kill me. Uh, I won't mention the name, but a lot of authors who are focusing on this stuff. So I think just being informed about this stuff, it's a cultural shift. So creating these sacred spaces where people, and I know I listened to a little bit of your past interview, but where people feel seen, safe, and not ashamed for their struggle is so important. These
Mhm.
sacred, safe places to ask the tough questions, to be a little different and quirky and to go deep and model vulnerability and not give an ethos of judgment and criticism and monolithic ways of being and seeing and feeling and hearing and behaving and dressing. Gosh, that can go such a long way. So churches can model the radical healing love of God by making room for grief, doubt, neurodiversity, and difference,
Yeah.
and really embody the subversive heart of God by showing up for the things younger generations care deeply about.
Yeah.
And it's not so much propositions as is a much about justice and equity and belonging. And some churches are like, no, we are going to focus on having the right doctrine. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but
Mhm.
it should be focusing on the right doctrine as modeled through the actions of
Yeah.
mercy and justice and kindness and equity and belonging. If not, young people, like, there's such a dissonance here.
Right.
Really, it's all about getting it right in my head as
Right.
opposed to embodying these Christ-like actions in our world. So those are some of the things that I think about that could be helpful.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Yeah, I mean, and John in Revelation challenged through Jesus' words the church in Ephesus, who was just about the mind and completely lost the heart. And
mhm.
I think you're dead on with that. It's vital for that piece. I was just really quickly a writing mentor of mine was writing a book on the 8 next stages of how to engage Generation Z in the
Mm.
church, and had me pre-read it. They had not one thing out of 4 authors, they had not one thing about mental health. And so I wrote
Ah,
I
mhm,
wrote a very strong, loving, "Hey, you're missing the boat if you don't integrate this." So they
mhm,
took
mhm.
another 7, 8 months to rewrite it and integrate mental health into it.
That's awesome.
It
Mhm.
was a really cool response. I mean, I was
That's
expecting
great.
to say, "No, we're done with this. Thanks for
Yeah,
your,"
yeah.
but they saw the
Thank
importance.
you for advocating in that way, Marvin.
Yeah,
I love your heart. Yeah,
it's important, man. It really is. Um,
yeah.
so I know we don't have all kinds of time, so I'm gonna
Mhm.
move on to a different question uh,
Sure.
for you in this. I want to make sure I get to this question if it
Yeah,
with
yeah.
bouncing around. Um, your call at the end of the book is challenging your readers to get back to a radical, sacred ethic of love. And I love that phrase, radical sacred ethic of love. I know that
Mm.
we might differ on how the end result looks like, you and I, but what hinders many believers from getting to a radical sacred ethic of love?
Mm. That is a really good question. I think it's, gosh, there's so many dynamics. Fear,
Mm,
and it's a very human thing. Um, Fear of what others think, fear of sometimes of our own power. Those two in and of itself are so powerful. Fear of what other people think. If I do this, like, if I just stepped out and asked myself, Holy Spirit, what would you want me to do this week as a way to love my neighbor?
mm,
The Holy Spirit usually is not going to give a very safe answer. Well, listen, what I want you to do is just go in your room, spend some time in prayer, and just pray for that person. That may be, but the more beautifully dangerous thing is, I want you to cross the bridge I want you to go on this lake to this demoniac, so to speak. I
Mhm.
want you to do something dangerous that's outside of your comfort zone. I want you to go to them and, hey, I was just thinking about you. I'd just love to spend some time with you and see how you're doing.
Mm.
My gosh, I'm getting palpitations. I have to go over to the house, knock on the door. Well, what if they don't like me? Or what if they think I'm nuts? Or what if they think that's just strange and what if they reject me? So fear, believe it or not, I think really keeps a lot of people
Wow.
from being more Christ-like in that sense. And then in another related, I think maybe past trauma, of course, which then fear can be a part of that, but internalized shame and nagging self critic, inner critic. I mean, these things that can thwart the Spirit of God at work in our life to be more loving and patient and kind, which are all things that are not something we can do in our home. There are things that should be embodied,
Yeah.
and that's a beautifully dangerous terrain for all of us. For me, to go outside of our comfort zones, to live Christ like, to be a rabble rousing revolutionary, and sometimes to piss people off, to fight for the oppressed and the marginalized, and to give to the poor and to visit people who are sick and the widows. That is some wild Christian, gnarly stuff.
Yeah.
Um, that's beautifully dangerous and something that I have a hard time myself in doing.
Yeah, you mentioned those as radical, but biblically speaking, those should be normative.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean? And I think that might even be more the radical statement that these things that seem radical to our culture are biblically normative calls to what we're to do. Um,
Yeah.
but it is radical because of our own selfishness to get out of our
Mhm.
fear was an interesting one. I was not anticipating that to be
Yeah,
that's good, man. I really appreciate that
yeah.
insight. So, as you have been going on your own journey, you've talked a little bit about it here. Do
Mhm.
you, when you look at your views, how they've changed and adjusted from the
Mhm.
more conservative view to a little bit more progressive view, um, do you have any regrets about the adjustment, how it went about, how you had your views adjust from church and faith? Do you say, I live with no regrets, this is the journey I needed to take? Or there's some bumps that you wish didn't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would say none, zero, nada. I am who I am. I am where I am, and I believe what I believe, and don't believe what I don't believe, and I'm okay with that.
Mm,
You know, there's an interesting. I think it was in that book. Ronnie Ware, a palliative nurse,
mm,
wrote the top five regrets of the dying. And so here she is being with people at the end of their life. And one of the top five regrets, which I'll never forget, is as you look back, all these old people on their deathbed looking back, I regret living the life that others expected of me and not a life that was true to myself.
oh, wow.
That really informs my journey.
Yeah,
Contrary to what some conservative folks might suggest, we want to err from the faith because we want to live a life of debauchery and be in cahoots with Satan somehow. It's quite the opposite. I'm wanting what I do, hopefully, is coming from a heart of love, from the heart of God, to question those things that I have found unhealthy in the church, attitudes, propositions, practices. And so my heart is not to like do this in the angstville. It's to do this with the spirit of love.
yeah,
And, I'm not keen to dehumanize people, even my conservative friends. I so appreciate you in the work that you're doing. You are who you are and you are where you are.
yeah,
I didn't ask for it. Many people on this journey say, I didn't ask for it. It happened. And like a snowball gaining traction, it just one day I realized I can't think and live the same way I was doing. I have to live a life that's true to myself. But again, I'm happily married, 17 years, 15 years, 17 years together. I'm not doing anything wild and crazy, and I don't drink or smoke or do things. I'm just a regular guy who loves people and loves God, and wants to make the world a better place.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the difficulty is not being able to listen to one another, because I appreciate your work, and things that you have written significantly challenged me to think through my own lens, which is, I think, vital for believers. Well, we don't often take time. People who are living in deconstruction angstyville don't want to try and take time to listen at that point because
Mhm.
there's so much anger and dissonance. But
Yeah.
most conservatives, I think, don't don't live in an angstyville, but they just don't want to have
Mm.
dialogue. Um,
Right, right, right.
so I think that
Yeah, they're at home.
yeah,
They're what they feel at home, that station, and I'm good, fine. This is where God is. My people are my tribe.
yeah,
Anything else is just well, heretical. Yeah, basically.
yeah, yeah. But I
Yeah,
think having these dialogues is key. So thank you for taking your time. My last question for you, and
yeah,
then
yeah.
we'll end the show. But what drives you to write on the topics that you do? Because you've had a wide swath of different things that you've written on
Mhm.
in your writing career. So what drives you?
Yeah. Well, this is an easy four-letter word, and it's not the F word. It's love.
Hmm.
Love. I mean, yeah. Whether the first book on helping people heal from heartbreak, the second book I think was on rethinking about petitionary prayer,
Mhm.
and seeing how, in some ways, it can create more damage than good, especially if we're not conspiring with God to be the hands and feet of God, and we solely rest upon God to be the sole agent of change in the world and in people's lives. And whether it's religious refugees helping people work through the disorienting deconstruction, reconstruction journey, or the next one dealing helping people work through health trauma to the point where people lose sleep, panic attacks, have such internalized shame, find a sense of hopelessness, um, just considerable dislike for themselves and hope for the future. And the last book on helping has nothing to do with religious trauma and all to do with helping couples love one another.
Mm.
So it's all for me about love, and I attribute a lot to Naya College, actually. Some people have a lot of not good things to say, but I guess for me, coming from a place of the oneness Pentecostal experience,
Mm.
such rigidity and hell trauma and internalized shame, and could never feel like I was good enough or saved, or to well, I didn't find it to be academically rigorous, but I got the wool-born spiritual formation. I got the heart,
Yeah.
and that spiritual formation emphasis was just. I was going to use the F word because nothing can capital. It's just so. It changed my life. It was
Yeah.
so healing.
Yeah.
Being in the room with John Tracy, who was coming from the Vineyard tradition,
Yeah.
and talking to me about the Father's love while I was, on the ground weeping and snot ridden for hours of just being completely. I mean, those were priceless to me. It changed my life.
Yeah. Yeah, that class definitely changed my life as well in many, many ways.
Yeah.
Um, but Mark, I really do appreciate you. I appreciate you taking time to answer these questions. I think your journey and your academic description, which really allows us to see what's happening in the journey, and not just a brief look at it, but you're real descriptive in your book, Religious
Hmm.
Refugees. I thank you for that work, and thank you for your time here. And hopefully, we all can learn how to help others walk through this journey without
Hmm.
pushing them aside and saying there's no room for doubt in this place, or there's
Yeah. Yeah.
that there is room for those hard questions. So thanks again. I always
Love
enjoy
it.
listening
Mhm.
to your perspectives, and I find that I learn a lot when I ask questions of you and stop trying to debate certain issues.
Right. Love it, Marvin. Again, love your heart here. Appreciate the conversation, and I'll see you when I look at you.
All right, man. Thanks, man. Thank you.
Okay, peace.
Thank you for joining us on Cultivating Candor, a community for honest Christian discussion, content, and commentary. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube page and check us out on Apple Podcasts as well. Please share them so that we can continue to get the word out about Cultivating Candor. Thanks, and hope to see you for episode 3.